Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Barker. I'm the Dean of the Trevor School of the Arts. Today, we're going to be talking with the chair of the art department in the Trevor School of the Arts, Kevin Appel, about some of the ways in which the art department works, some of its history, some of the amazing things that it's doing, where it's going, and on from there. And so I welcome you, Kevin Appel. Good morning.
Morning. How are you?
Doing great. I want you to just begin by saying a couple of things about yourself. How long have you been at UCI? Where have you come from? What's your art and academic background? Just introduce yourself just briefly.
Okay, my name is Kevin Appel. I'm a painter and I've been at UCI for 20 years now. And I'm from Los Angeles originally. And what else can I say? I did my bachelor's from Parsons School of Design in New York and then master's at UCLA. Painted for a number of years after that, and then landed at UCI around 2000.
Actually, let me ask you a question about that, because actually, of course, even though you're a native of Los Angeles, very interesting move to have gone to New York to Parsons. Obviously, it's an incredible place to have gone. Was there a particular reason why you chose to go to New York to do your undergraduate work?
Well, there were two things. There was the practical side of it that at that time, actually, Otis here was affiliated with Parsons. They had a sharing program, so I was able to transfer over there easily. The other thing is that I just wanted to be near the museums and galleries that were flourishing at that time in New York and still do, right? But at the time in LA, there was a lot less going on in terms of what you could physically stand in front of in terms of artwork. So living in New York for a little while was important to me.
And when you came back to UCLA to do your MFA work, was that just to get back to California, or were things starting to happen more interestingly, kind of magnetically bringing you back? How did you get back to the West Coast?
Well, I went from New York to San Francisco, actually, and I was living there for a number of years, just a few years. And I think right around the time that I started to apply to graduate schools was when I had seen Helter Skelter, the show that Paul Schimmel curated at MoCA. And that was just kind of a big burst in my brain about art production in general. And really, really moved me and made me want to come back here and be embedded in the kind of woolly art historical culture that California represents.
It's really an interesting story, because in fact, it's of course how California itself developed. The East Coast came to San Francisco and then came south. And so you actually replicated something that's a very important part of our culture in general. But in fact, of course, you've shown your work around the world. Your credits in your bio go all the way from Europe to Mexico to various other parts of the world. You've been very widely shown. Do you have any regular galleries where you show your work?
Right now, I show at Miles McHenry Gallery in New York. I've been there. I've had 2 solo exhibitions there, and have one coming up next year. It's going to be next year, I think is when it's scheduled for. We've been back and forth because of the pandemic, and I get sort of caught up in whether or not I just want to allow this show to be more of an online experience or wait for things to open up more. And that's why I've been sort of postponing this exhibition. But yes, I show there. I've got nothing in Los Angeles regular at this time, because I was with Christopher Grimes Gallery for a number of years and he retired.
Yeah, right. Well, it's a once again a very interesting trajectory. Your long history with the art department here, you've held a very wide variety of positions in the art department. I know you spent a long time, many years, as the head of graduate studies, and I want to ask you more about that. But now, for the last number of years, you've actually been the chair of the art department. So you've, in a sense, been the person who's been in charge of the legacy of the department in that regard. So let me give you the opportunity to say a few words about the really fairly storied history of the art department at UCI.
Well, I would say that if there's anything that would set us apart there's been a history of a radical approach to art production associated with UC Irvine. I mean, you go all the way from Chris Burden having been a student here. The locker piece, the famous Chris Burden locker piece, happened at UC Irvine. But this idea of pushing at the boundaries of what's expected in terms of art practice is something that we have invested in. And one of the other aspects of that is a connection to, I would say, social practices or social awareness in terms of political discourse as it is associated with art production. That has been something that we have championed for, that really makes up our identity as an art department and continues to do so. So I would say new forms, but also, in new forms in terms of media, but also consistently updating our thinking in terms of the theoretical underpinnings of what it is that we produce in the art department has been something that motivates us.
Yeah, I would say that's a real byline for the department. It's really fascinating. And actually, just in terms of just a couple of pieces of information and statistics, what is the size of the faculty of the art department? How many actual positions does the department consist of?
I think we're at 20 now. I get a little confused because we've had some retirements and we have the search going on right now, but I'm pretty sure we're at the 20 mark or right around there. So, and we have, people who have been here for almost 30 years, and then people who have been hired within the last few years. So we have a nice range.
Very nice mix.
Yeah.
And obviously the department, like all of the departments in the School of the Arts, consists of both an undergraduate and a graduate component. You have both a BA degree here and an MFA degree. The MFA cohort of students is roughly 25 or so, is that right?
That's where it is now. Our max is around 30, and it sort of fluctuates between 25 and 30, I would say. And it's a 3-year program. When I first got to UCI, it was a 2-year program. And one of the things that we had started to notice, this is back when I was graduate chair, but we had started to notice that that extra year was really key. And one of the ways that it breaks down is that the first year you're getting acclimated, right, as a student. The second year is usually what I call the existential year. It's when you've had enough brutal critiques that you start to fall apart, right? But then from that falling apart is you go into your third year, and that's when you really start deciding what it is you want to do as an artist and being able to pick up the pieces of what had been shattered in terms of your original ideas coming into the program, and then reformulating into something that really becomes the kind of strong framework for your work moving forward. So that third year just became really, really crucial.
Yeah, that's something. It's an interesting discussion. MFA programs and master's programs in general often used to be 2 years, and now really, particularly in the arts, the standard is a 3-year program. Certainly the standard in the Claire Trevor School of the Arts, which virtually all of our master's programs are 3 years. Following that trajectory, kind of a year of getting acclimatized, a year of breaking bad habits and figuring out who you don't want to be. And then in the third year, figuring out more and more about what kinds of things you want to do. And by the end of that third year, putting together a corpus of work that you can be pretty proud of, having gone through that process. And I know that in the third year, at the end of the third year, the thesis productions of or exhibitions of the soon to be graduating MFA students are really pretty amazing. They've gotten a tremendous amount of coverage and press because they're, as you say, on the one hand, all over the place because you've encouraged a kind of boutique development of the artist. Everybody is different and develops along their own lines, working with their own a set of faculty members, but on the other hand, obviously to a very rigorous standard and high expectations from students and faculty alike. How does that replicate itself at the undergraduate level? But I know that it's at least 200 undergraduates at the moment. And that's a huge, huge number of students, given the nature of studio work that has to be done and personal attention that has to be given. How do you and the faculty deal with this huge number of undergraduate students, just in terms of your strategy of approach to them?
Well, we have a slate of basic and then essentially intermediate and then advanced coursework. And when you were talking about how do we replicate some of the stuff that I was talking about in the graduate area, I mean, obviously it's not possible to completely replicate that type of experience, but I would say that as they move through the system, the attention that they get gets more and more personalized. And we offer them opportunities for independent studies to work with ladder faculty, which is a one-on-one type experience that is quite in keeping with the type of interactions you would have with faculty at the graduate level. And this is motivated by the students. If they are interested in doing something like that, and there's a faculty member that has the time and it's in the area of interest that the student is working in, then there's a possibility for them to do that. We also have an honors program, and the only thing that limits our honors program is space, really, because the graduate students, the honors students get their own studio space for a year. The problem with that is that we don't have enough space to give to as many students that we would like to. But for the students that get into that program, it's an intensive program that models itself much more on what graduate study is like, because they get to be in the space, they get to leave their work up in the space and treat that as a kind of their own laboratory and have faculty come and go from that space to see what they've been working on. So rather than be an assignment-based type of thing, it is a self-motivated practice. They also get to interact a lot with the graduate students on that level. Another opportunity that we have for our undergrad students is called Catalyst Gallery. And it's an undergraduate run small gallery space. We are hands-off with this. The faculty do not get involved in terms of deciding what's going to be in the spaces or curating anything in any way. The students choose a committee. That committee formulates the schedule for the year for Catalyst Gallery, and it's an opportunity for students to show their work and to also have critical discussions about the work with faculty member and also graduate students. So it's a really good opportunity, and I can't remember how long it's been in place, but it was actually an old faculty member of ours who has since passed, Gifford Myers, who you remember. He gave up his office space in the ACT building in order to make this happen, and it's been going ever since.
It's such a wonderful thing to have a self-motivated undergraduate gallery called the Catalyst Gallery. I mean, it's so perfect. It's really wonderful. I've dropped upstairs to have a look at some of the things that have been done there. They've really been quite wonderful. What I really love about the Catalyst Gallery idea is that it's such an important part of the undergraduate pedagogy, in the sense, not only in terms of art making, but in terms of self-motivation. I mean, anybody who is heading for a career as an artist just has to be self-motivated and has to say, look, I'm doing this because I just can't do anything else. I have to do this. And I love the idea that the faculty just stand back and say, okay, there are going to be some things that are done in the Catalyst Gallery that students later on will kind of wish they hadn't done. But that's part of the point. They're getting to do what they need to do there. So it's just a great idea. So I look forward to being able to get back to being able to get up into the ACT building and seeing what's going on there. You bring up a topic that is just so interesting in terms of the whole teaching business that art faculty and other faculty, obviously all faculty at UCI are doing, which is dealing with the current conditions that we're in. In the current world, we're in early January at the moment of 2021, and everything is in shutdown. We have no idea where things are going at this point. All we can say that is that it doesn't look tremendously positive in terms of getting us back to anything like normality. So I want to give you the opportunity to talk just a little bit, Kevin, about the way in which you and the art faculty are dealing with art in the world of COVID. Teaching remotely, which is what all the faculty are doing, has resulted in some enormously creative and frustrating ways of actually dealing with this. So what are some of the ways in which the remote teaching world that we've been forced into is actually operating with regard to the art faculty? And let's start with what's happening with grad students, since you, like everybody else in the School of the Arts, has a special obligation to graduate students who are seen as pre-professional people who are really committed to doing their art. How has teaching at the grad level actually adapted to the COVID problem?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say it's been easy. It's been complicated, but we feel that we're making some headway with it. And I would say one thing, first of all, is the faculty just hit the ground running. I mean, I'm really thankful for all of the energy and time faculty put into trying to make this work as best as possible for our graduate students. And I would say the first thing that happened, they all get their own studios and they had to leave the studios. So what became quickly important for us was to set up a kind of structure where we could get them back into their studios in a staggered way, right? Of course, they can't come and go as they please anymore, but we were able to space out their timing in such a way that they're able to at least spend a portion of their time back in their studios getting work done. We extended the use of studios for our third-year students last year. The numbers might get confusing, but we call them our fourth years. We don't have a fourth year, but the reason we did this is because we wanted our third-year students at the time to still be able to have their thesis exhibitions, because the galleries were shut down in the quarter that they were supposed to have their exhibitions. So we extended these into the fall, just this last fall, and that gave the students, once the break started to free up and they were able to get into their studios for a certain amount of time, they were able to work over the summer, complete their thesis exhibitions, and we just mounted the exhibitions this fall. So one of the things that differentiates the grad program at UCI is that we have 3 separate gallery spaces that we're able to use. We use them for professional exhibitions, which we can talk about a little bit later, but then also for student exhibitions. And so for our graduate students, it means that they get really professionally scaled solo exhibitions for their thesis. This is a rarity in MFA programs. So, our students, obviously, this is one of the reasons they come to us. This is one of the things that they're excited about. And so we wanted to make sure that our fourth-year students were able to still have that experience. And so we mounted the shows. We were able to get them a schedule of visitors to the shows that was very, very, very stripped down, really just faculty members and a few of their cohort. But they were able to get professional photography of the shows. And then also we've been working with Bruce Warner from the XMPL in working on sort of virtual tours. So there are these 3D walk around the spaces to give people as best an experience as close to being in the space as possible using this new technology. So that's how we handled it with graduate students. For our fourth years, the other thing I would mention is that we had, for our critique courses for graduate students, we have developed these kind of remote carts that has a big screen. It has a stationary camera and also a handheld camera. So if the student is in their space and everybody else is not in the space, they're at their homes or wherever, the student is able to use the handheld camera, walk around an artwork, walk close up to a painting if it's up on the wall, and give people a more in-depth look at what it is that they're working on so that we can have our critiques be as thorough as possible under the current conditions. So that's been a success.
It's really a great use of the technology, and I know from having talked to a couple of your graduate students that they're very, very pleased with the way in which you and the faculty have responded to what are clearly the essential needs. I should point out that one of the things that UCI has done since the advent last March of our absence from campus is to make sure that truly essential activities do find a way very carefully and very safely onto the campus. Mm-hmm. So even though for the most part the campus is empty, there are activities going on that are very carefully protected and very carefully planned out so that everyone is safe. The most common place where this happens, of course, is in the sciences, where laboratory work has to continue, otherwise all your mice die or your cultures disappear, etc. And so there's been an understanding from the very beginning that so-called essential work needs to go on campus. And we've been fortunate enough to carve out a case for the essential nature of work in the studios, particularly the grad work, as essential work that in laboratory stroke studio form has to go on. The one thing that they miss, I think, is the ability to have a proper opening, a proper ability of a large number of folks to actually walk through and be enjoying the work at the same time. It just isn't possible. But given the fact that many, many places are simply shut down, at least what you and the faculty have done has given a maximal opportunity for viewing the work, which is really, I think, really satisfying for the graduate students. Of course, this hasn't been able to continue for the huge population of undergraduates. What's happening with this population? What's the adaptation that's happened for them?
Well, there's a lot of asynchronous teaching going on. You know, we have students that are still in California. We have students that have moved back home all over the world, really. So that means that there's a lot of recorded lessons going on. Faculty have been working really hard to do demonstrations and things like that for their students so that they can work on some of the things at home that they would be working on in classrooms. And then there's all the creative ways that faculty have been helping students to expand the way that they think about their work. And, you know, there is a plus to that, you know, because some students get stuck in their head a certain way that art learning happens. You walk into a classroom, there's a still life set up, or there's clay in the room, and you work on a certain assignment to get something done, right? The materials are either provided for you or they're specified by the faculty member. But here you are at home, right? And you don't have the space and you don't necessarily have the material or the tools. So for some faculty members, I'm thinking of Liz Glynn's class in particular, sculpture class. I think it was last spring when all of this was really just starting out. She took a very, let's say, by any means necessary attitude, like look at what's around you. What can you use that's at your fingertips to create a sculpture? And some of the students came up with amazing projects. You know, one of the students' father is a mechanic, and she went into his home shop and was able to fabricate things out of the type of materials that he was using to fix automobiles. And so it had both a connection to her family and her history, and then also this idea like, what's around me? Okay, I don't have the table saw at school. I don't have this, I don't have that. What can I use? I'm also thinking about an interesting take this quarter. I was talking with Monica Maioli, painting professor, about how she's going to handle advanced painting, which she's teaching for the first time, you know, without having the room for students to work in. And so she put together a lecture for the first class that talks, where she goes through artists that worked in much more confined conditions to show them that this is possible, right? So she's going to talk about Frida Kahlo, for instance, you know, after her injury, painting from bed, right? Painting in her bed. Joseph Cornell worked at home, very small space. Morris Louis, the painter, worked in his living room. There's famous photographs of Louise Bourgeois, a small desk that she worked at for all of her career. So sort of showing them that the idea of a kind of large studio space, which, you know, hopefully they will get their hands on either with us or in their futures someday, is not necessarily the only way to produce work. So I thought that was a great idea on Monica's part to sort of to show people how much can be done with very little space. And so I have yet to hear how that lecture goes, but I'm hoping it's as motivating as I think it could be.
So it's a great idea. The idea of using the examples of artists who, in other circumstances, but very limited circumstances, actually made a positive out of those limitations. I think of you brought him up. I think of Joseph Cornell working at the kitchen table, putting his boxes together, being very quiet so he didn't wake his mother up. You know, these kinds of stories of incredible creativity that have come out of the most bizarre of circumstances. It's really important to remember that, because it is a question of just motivating great energy. And I know one of the things that's most interesting to the art faculty and under your leadership is this idea of energizing students to be really as inventive, not just creative, but inventive as they can possibly be, and find ways to solve problems. It's just an incredibly valuable part of their education. And in fact, in terms of what's happened under COVID, I know something else that's happened in your department has been necessarily, but also really, really inventively, the increased use of documentation to make sure that the art process and the art product are actually recorded, are actually part of the process. So say something about this notion of the way in which the documentation has worked in the department.
Well, I think early on in conversations, to pick up on what you were just saying, it was something that I had pushed forward to students, graduate students and undergrads alike, in some of these conversations that we were having with them early on, was that, you know, it's not the last hardship you're going to go through as an artist, right? And so how do you sort of capitalize on a situation and still persevere and move through it in your practice? But one of the other things that started to become clear through conversations with faculty and starting to notice what was going on out in the art world is that it seems to me that these forms of documentation and online display, for instance, they're not going anywhere, whether you like it or not. You know, I mean, certainly seeing art in person is absolutely key. And personally miss it terribly, but the idea that you start building in the thinking of documentation into the work as you're creating the work. That was something that Jennifer Pastor had brought up in some conversations with her students, I know, is that how are you approaching this work so that you're thinking about how it's going to be represented in other forms, either photographically, video, online, at the time that you're making it. So that you build in that component to the thinking and the fabrication of the work. I think it's been very important in the past. Documentation is extremely important. We've always tried to help our graduate students with that, for instance, in terms of how they're going to take their thesis shows out into the world after they graduate. But of course, under these circumstances, we start to recognize just how important it really is, because in some cases, when things like this happen, it's the only way people are going to see your work. So how do you do it in such a way that you're represented in the best way possible?
It's very important, and particularly, as you say, in times of various kinds of hardship, like the one that we're in at the moment. And one of the things that I most admire about the art department is the incredible breadth of the work that you do that gets documented in various forms, all the way from recording actual physical shows that take place in the galleries, to using the various media that are documentation forms themselves, such as film, photography, etc. But there's also a very interesting cohort among your faculty who are actual publishers. You yourself have published a tremendous amount of writing on and about art, your own art and that of others. I just want to point out briefly that next week in January, the 13th and the 14th, there are actually two events that are art department oriented, that are examples of the incredible diversity and breadth of what the faculty does. On the 13th of January, there's going to be an event which is a celebration, an interview celebration of a publication that your faculty member Antoinette Lafarge has done, author of a new book on Louise Brigham, who was one of the first people who actually pioneered self-assembled furniture during the progressive era, the very beginning of the 20th century. And Antoinette Lafarge has really discovered and written about this almost unknown figure who actually lived until 1956, but whose work from the early part of the 20th century was absolutely essential to the whole notion of doing away with all of the waste in the production, not just of furniture, but everything else. And this is a scholarly work on the life and work of Louise Brigham. The following day, the 14th, is the opening of one of the gallery shows that I think is going to be a real blockbuster for the art department. It's a show called Black Index, which is actually curated by art history professor Bridget Cooks, but which is taking place in our galleries under your direction as chair of the art department. So let me ask you to say a few words about Black Index and its importance for the department and the school.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. With COVID going on, it's been sort of on again, off again. But it's a really important show, and it is 7 artists that are dealing with Black representation in different media, right? So it's drawing, printmaking, sculpture, performance, and also digital technologies, and really unpacking ideas of representation of the Black body as processed through the sort of mediating forces of photography, but looking at it as a jumping off point for a self-representation, right? Away from the constrictions of what we understand as traditional photography. And so, Bridget and I talked about this some time ago, and it sounded really exciting, and wanted to make space in the galleries for her to be able to do this. It's a great opportunity also for us to have a collaboration with art history and also African American studies, where she also has a professorship. So she is in both those departments. And so, you know, moving forward towards the show, I kept coming back to Bridget and saying, do you still want to do this? Do you still want to do this? Because we're unclear exactly about what's going to happen in terms of people being able to visit. It opens on the 14th. It runs through March 20th. You know, hopefully toward the end of that, we'll be able to open the doors at least a little bit more. But in the meantime, along with this show itself, there's going to be very robust programming surrounding it that people will be able to visit online. So there's going to be 4 performances. 3 of those performances actually involve other departments at Trevor. So we have the dance department and music department involved in performances. I think for one performance, there's actually going to be a grand piano pulled into the CAC gallery, which is exciting. So these will all be recorded and available online. And then also there are, I think, 6 or 7 symposia and lectures going on. And those are already posted on the gallery website, and you can RSVP to them now. So I highly recommend people go and take a look at all the programming that surrounds this exhibition. It's going to be, you know, it's going to be a very, very robust set of programming on very interesting subjects. And thankfully for Bridget, also the show is traveling. So, and I think its final destination is going to be Hunter in New York. That was supposed to be where it opened, but then they completely shut down. We took over the opening. And so it's going to travel from us to, I think, Palo Alto, and then ultimately to Hunter. And also it's going to have a catalog that is in production now. I think last time I talked to Bridget, she's at work with a red pen on the final pages of that. So that should be coming out soon as well. So that's another exciting component of this.
It's just an incredible diversity. You talked earlier on about the need in the department, the philosophy of the art department to be engaged socially. And here in the course of 2 days, the 13th and the 14th of January, we have 2 events, both of which are aimed at the production of art events, art experiences that range all the way from the very practical with the Louise Brigham furniture history to the incredible multimedia presentation that begins on the 14th with Black Index. And both of them very much aimed at aspects of living in contemporary culture, which need to be looked at very closely and that are being treated in the most remarkable of ways. So it's an incredible diversity of fantastically energetic and innovative work that the department is doing. Kevin, I'm just enormously grateful for all of the really wonderful work that you've presented to us and things you've had to say about what's happening in the department. I wish you all the very best for continuing to work very privately toward the completion of a set of works that we hope to see soon, or maybe not so soon, in the new year coming up. We're all just hoping for more and more normality to return to our lives, but given what you've offered us to think about in the last period of time here in this interview, it's very clear that what's happening in the art department is just wonderfully thoughtful about the way in which not only your faculty are working, but that you yourself as chair of the art department are really bringing your students, both graduate students and undergraduate students, forward into more and more thoughtful and deep ways of thinking about their art careers. Please have a wonderful opportunity to get back into your studio. Thanks so much for this interview today.
All right. Thank you. It's been great. Thank you.